On a stormy night in Redwood Valley, a 5-year-old girl and her German shepherd stepped onto an old wooden bridge near their home. Blood streaked across the planks, dripping into the dark creek, and beneath a fallen motorcycle, a young biker lay pinned, gasping for life. But why was he left to die alone in the rain? And what secret did his torn leather jacket carry in its blood-stained threads? Stay with me for just one more minute, and you'll hear how a child's courage and a loyal dog uncovered a betrayal that shook an entire town. If stories like this move you, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next one. And tell me, what would you do if compassion was the only thing left to trust? I hope you're having a peaceful day, wherever you're watching from. The storm had been building over Redwood Valley since dusk, rolling in from the far hills with a low growl of thunder that rattled the windows of every wooden house. By nightfall, the clouds split open, unleashing a relentless curtain of rain that hammered rooftops, rattled gutters, and sent streams of water rushing along the cracked pavement. The streets of the small town were nearly deserted, porch lights swallowed by the downpour, while in the distance, the tall pines swayed like dark sentinels in the wind. Out of that curtain of rain, two figures appeared on the muddy lane near the Carter household. A little girl in a damp dress clutching her scarf tighter to her chest, and at her side a large German shepherd, his black and tan coat already soaked, his ears alert and eyes sharp. They were heading home from a short visit to her aunt's house, no more than a few turns down the road, but the night had turned wilder than anyone expected. Emily Carter was only 5 years old, small for her age, with fair skin, shoulder-length blonde hair plastered to her cheeks by the rain, and wide blue eyes that seemed even larger under the flicker of lightning. She wore a beige polka-dot dress that clung damply to her knees, black ankle-high shoes, and around her neck a navy scarf that her father insisted she never leave behind. Despite her young age, she had a streak of courage, often surprising even Jack, her father, though tonight the storm made her tiny frame shiver. Beside her trotted Rex, a 6-year-old German shepherd K9, muscular and imposing, his sable coat plastered against his ribs, the black saddle marking across his back gleaming under the wet. Once trained for service, Rex carried himself with the calm authority of a veteran, his black harness bearing the faded patch that read, "Veteran K9." His loyalty to Jack and Emily was absolute, his instincts sharp enough to sense danger before it showed its face. As the pair crossed the narrow wooden bridge spanning a stony drainage creek, Rex suddenly stopped. His paws pressed against the soaked boards, claws scraping faintly, his body stiff as he raised his head. A low growl rolled from his chest, not loud but enough to make Emily pause and glance nervously around. She followed the direction of his gaze, her breath catching in her throat. Across the slick boards, barely visible through sheets of rain, a dark stain spread wide. It was crimson, diluted by water yet still distinct, running in thin rivulets between the gaps of the planks, dripping down into the rushing creek below. Emily froze, her small hand tightening around the scarf, her heart pounding. A flash of lightning lit up the scene in cruel clarity. Just beyond the smear of blood, a motorcycle lay twisted on its side, one wheel still spinning with a metallic click against the boards. The chrome glinted dully in the storm, mud splattered across its body. Beneath its heavy frame, half pinned against the wooden rail in a jut of rock at the creek's edge, was a man. He appeared to be in his early 40s, his frame broad though slack with exhaustion, his arms tattooed with dark sprawling ink that seemed to crawl down into the sleeves of his torn leather jacket. His hair was black, slick with rain, his face streaked with blood from a cut along his temple. His chest rose shallowly, lips parted in a weak groan that was almost swallowed by the roar of water below. Emily's breath came sharp, a frightened sob caught in her throat. She had never seen so much blood before, not flowing like this. Not painting the wood beneath her shoes, she instinctively clutched Rex's damp fur, pressing against his side for safety. The German shepherd lowered his body protectively, teeth bared just slightly, every muscle coiled as though he would leap if the man so much as moved too quickly. Emily, though terrified, gathered her courage and did the only thing she could think of. She spun on her heel, her shoes splashing water, and bolted across the bridge toward home. Her small voice rang out against the storm, thin yet urgent. "Dad, there's someone on the bridge. He's hurt." Inside the Carter cabin, Jack Carter had been seated near the fireplace, listening to the storm's steady roar while tightening a strap on Rex's spare harness. At 42, Jack was a man of heavy build, tall and muscular from years of service. His dark brown hair, trimmed short, carried streaks of gray, and his rugged face bore the lines of battles fought and endured. He wore his olive-green military field jacket even indoors, the fabric worn soft, the patch of the flag on his arm faded with time. Around his neck hung his silver dog tags, the metal clinking softly when he rose. Hearing his daughter's cry cut through the thunder, Jack snatched up a flashlight and charged into the rain without hesitation. His boots pounded against the sodden ground, water splashing high around his legs as he sprinted toward the bridge. Emily stood near its edge, clutching Rex, her eyes wide with fear but her posture brave, unwilling to leave the stranger alone. Jack's beam of light cut through the sheets of rain, swinging over the wreck. The sight made his gut tighten. The biker still pinned beneath the heavy motorcycle, blood running steadily down into the creek. Jack dropped to his knees beside him, the flashlight gripped between his teeth as he pressed 2 fingers against the man's throat. There was a pulse, faint but steady, proof that life clung stubbornly. Jack leaned closer, his brow furrowing as the beam illuminated the torn leather jacket. The man's breathing was ragged, each exhale damp and broken, and with it came a sharp scent Jack knew all too well. It was the acrid tang of gunpowder, faint but unmistakable, clinging to the soaked fibers of the man's clothing. Jack's stomach turned cold. This was not an accident. Motorcycles crash, men bleed, but they do not carry the smell of a firefight on their jackets unless violence had carved its way into the night. Jack drew back slightly, his eyes narrowing as his mind raced, his instincts warning him that this stranger's story was tangled in something far darker than a storm. Emily crept closer, her small hand slipping into Jack's as if anchoring herself against the terror of the scene. She whispered shakily, "Is he going to die?" Jack squeezed her hand gently, his expression grim but steady, the kind of calm that came from years of holding fear at bay. "Not tonight," he murmured, though he knew the truth was fragile. Rex pressed close beside them, the rain dripping off his ears, his eyes fixed on the man beneath the motorcycle with a mix of suspicion and reluctant empathy. For a moment, the 3 of them, father, daughter, and dog, stood bound together by the weight of a stranger's life, caught in the storm's fury yet bound by an unspoken resolve. The storm raged on around them, lightning cracking across the valley, thunder rolling against the hills. The bridge creaked beneath the weight of the wreck and the pounding of rain, yet in that moment, everything else seemed to hold still. Emily's breath trembled, Jack's muscles strained as he shifted to free the biker, and Rex lowered his head, his growl fading into silence as if he too understood that the man was clinging to life by only a thread. The night had drawn them together on this fragile span of wood, and none of them knew that the blood on those planks was not just the mark of an accident, but the first shadow of a darker truth waiting to unfold. The storm still pounded Redwood Valley, hammering the rooftops and swelling the creek beneath the bridge, as Jack steadied his flashlight and tightened his grip on the motorcycle's handlebar. Emily clutched Rex's wet fur, her eyes locked on the biker pinned beneath the heavy frame, her lips trembling though she tried to stay silent. Jack planted his boots against the soaked planks, muscles straining as he braced his back against the weight. Rain coursed down his jacket, dripping from his cap brim in steady rivulets. He growled with effort, urging, "Rex, here!" And the German shepherd, sensing the command, pressed his massive shoulders against the bike. The motorcycle groaned against the effort, its steel frame grinding against the wood as Jack pulled upward. Rex bared his teeth in a snarl that was less aggression than raw determination, claws scraping for purchase as he pushed. Emily's small hands pressed against Jack's sleeve as if lending him strength. Together, man and dog heaved until the bike tipped back onto its side with a heavy crash, sliding across the planks in a spray of water. Beneath it, the biker gasped, his chest rising once more, though faintly, as though the act of surviving the crush had cost him everything. Rex stood over the man, hackles raised, his amber eyes fixed on the stranger with unyielding suspicion. The growl that rolled from his throat was deep, primal, echoing across the narrow bridge, warning that no harm would come to Emily while he lived. His ears flicked back, his entire body taut, ready to strike again. Emily stepped forward timidly, her hand resting gently on his soaked neck, whispering through her shivering breath, "Help him, Rex, please." The sound of her voice, soft and trembling, carried more weight than any command, and the dog's rigid stance slowly eased. His growl faded, replaced by a sharp whine, and he bent his head toward the man's mouth, testing for breath, his nose twitching against the rain and blood. Jack, already on his knees, hooked his arms beneath the biker's shoulders and heaved him up. The man was heavy, his weight slack and uncooperative, blood seeping into Jack's olive field jacket, staining it in thick patches. Emily's eyes widened as she saw the red soak into her father's clothes, but Jack only set his jaw tighter, grunting under the burden. Rex moved alongside, brushing his body against Jack's leg as though offering balance in the slippery storm. Together they staggered off the bridge, their boots sinking into mud, the world around them drowned in thunder and darkness, the night itself pressing hard upon their backs. The cabin came into view at last, its sagging roofline blurred through the curtain of rain, the faint glow of firelight struggling against the storm. Jack pushed the door open with his shoulder, nearly stumbling as he carried the biker inside. Emily ran ahead to drag a chair away from the hearth, her tiny hands tugging clumsily but with desperate resolve. Rex bounded in behind them, shaking himself once before pacing in a tight circle, his body tense, unwilling to rest while danger still hovered unseen. Jack lowered the man onto a threadbare sofa, his breath ragged as he pulled back and flexed his aching arms. Emily scrambled up onto the sofa's edge, her scarf slipping loose around her neck, and pulled a cloth from the basin her father kept near the hearth. Dipping it into the warm water, she wrung it out with trembling fingers before gently wiping the blood from the stranger's brow. Her motions were clumsy, her lips pressed tight in concentration, but her touch was gentle enough to coax a faint groan from the man's throat. She glanced up at Jack, silently asking if she was doing the right thing, and Jack gave a firm nod, the lines on his face etched deep with both worry and pride. Rex positioned himself at the foot of the sofa, his massive frame curled tightly, eyes unblinking as they tracked every shallow breath. Jack crouched beside the man, hands steady as he unbuckled the soaked leather jacket. The zipper was broken, torn open across the chest, the lining stiff with blood. He peeled it back cautiously, the smell of iron and smoke rising faintly in the warmth of the room. The man's tattoos sprawled across his arms and collarbone, sharp lines of black ink twisted by scars. Jack's hand brushed against an embroidered patch on the inside of the jacket bold, crimson, unmistakable. The outline of a vulture, wings spread, its hooked beak dripping with red thread. Jack's breath hitched, his jaw clenching as recognition surged. The red vultures. Emily, still perched close, tilted her head curiously, not understanding the weight of the symbol, but sensing the shift in her father's demeanor. "What is it, Daddy?" she asked softly, her voice small in the crackle of the fire. Jack slid the jacket shut again, his voice low and grim. "It means trouble." His gaze lingered on the biker's pale face, on the stubble across his jawline, on the exhaustion etched into every line of his expression. This was not just a wounded traveler caught in the storm. This man carried the mark of violence that stretched far beyond Redwood Valley. Rex's ears flicked at the sound of the name. Jack muttered under his breath, his growl low again, though tempered now by fatigue. The dog shifted his weight closer to Emily, pressing against her legs as though shielding her from the jacket's sinister emblem. Emily stroked his head absent-mindedly, her mind torn between fear and compassion. She looked back at the man, his chest rising in weak, stuttering breaths, and whispered, "He's still alive. We can't let him die." Her words trembled in the silence, but they carried the pure conviction of innocence that no storm could drown. Jack leaned back on his heels, his hands braced on his knees, eyes fixed on the wounded stranger. His mind turned over the weight of the discovery, the blood, the tattoos, the red vulture's insignia. Questions pressed against him like the storm outside. Who was this man? Why had he been left to bleed beneath a bridge? And what shadow now stretched its wings over his daughter's world? For now, the answers would wait. The fire crackled, rain battered the windows, and three figures sat bound in fragile alliance. A child's compassion, a dog's loyalty, and a soldier's wary resolve. The storm outside had not lessened, its steady roar pressing against the wooden walls of the Carter cabin, the windows rattling in their frames as if the night itself wanted entry. Inside, the air was thick with the mingled scent of damp earth, smoke from the struggling fire, and the metallic tang of blood that clung to the stranger's clothes. Jack knelt on the floor beside the worn sofa, his field jacket discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled high, hands steady despite the flicker of exhaustion in his eyes. Emily hovered nearby, her small frame perched on a low stool, her scarf slipping down her shoulders as she watched with anxious focus. Rex lay stretched across the rug, his wet fur steaming faintly from the hearth's warmth, his amber eyes locked unblinking on the injured man. Jack's fingers worked with precision, threading a curved needle through the deep gash along the biker's side. The wound was ragged, torn by both metal and impact, and every pull of the thread drew a faint twitch from the man's body. Jack's brow furrowed as he muttered under his breath, counting stitches, the old discipline of a soldier turned medic guiding him. The fire crackled unevenly, casting a glow that deepened the lines of concentration on his face. Emily leaned forward, gripping the edges of the stool, her blue eyes wide with fear yet unwilling to look away, determined to be part of saving the life before her. The man stirred faintly, his lips parting as though the thread of consciousness tugged him back from the depths. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, irises a stormy gray hidden behind lids heavy with exhaustion. He swallowed hard, breath rattling in his throat, before forcing out a sound that was more air than voice. Emily straightened sharply, leaning closer, the cloth she had been clutching falling into her lap. Jack glanced up from his work, his jaw tightening, prepared to silence her if curiosity leapt ahead of caution. The stranger's lips trembled, shaping words that cracked against the silence like fragile glass. "Red vultures," he rasped, each syllable dragging blood and breath together, his throat straining. His hand shifted weakly, fingers twitching as though reaching for something unseen. "They're hunting me." The words fractured, scattered by the weight of pain, before his eyes rolled back and his head slumped against the threadbare cushion. The stillness that followed was heavier than thunder, broken only by the storm's distant growl and the shallow rasp of his breath. Emily's small voice broke the silence, fragile yet insistent. "What does he mean, Daddy? Who are they?" She leaned forward, almost rising, her hand halfway toward the stranger, as if she could shake the answer free from his unconscious lips. Jack's hand rose swiftly, palm open, stopping her before the question could grow sharper. His voice was low, steady, and edged with warning. "Not now, Emily." He can't take more. His gaze lingered on the stranger, but his words were meant for her, carrying both authority and tenderness, guiding her away from the dangerous hunger for truth. The child's lower lip trembled, but she obeyed, sinking back onto the stool, her small hands clutching the scarf bunched in her lap. Her eyes, however, did not leave the biker's face, wide and glistening in the flickering firelight. She wanted to understand, to know why this man carried so much blood and fear into their quiet cabin, but even at her young age, she recognized the line between compassion and intrusion. She pressed her cheek against Rex's damp fur, drawing strength from his steady presence, her voice fading into silence. Rex adjusted his position slightly, his body pressing closer to the sofa, his nose brushing near the stranger's boots. His ears twitched at every shallow breath, his chest rumbling with a faint growl whenever the man stirred too suddenly, though it softened into a low whine that betrayed unease rather than aggression. His instincts warred between suspicion and protection, but his position never changed. He was a barrier between the wounded man and the child, a sentinel whose duty reached beyond words. Jack, watching from the corner of his eye, felt a flicker of grim pride. He had seen loyalty on battlefields, but never in such a pure, wordless form. The fire sputtered, smoke curling into the rafters as Jack tied off the final stitch with careful precision. He sat back, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, the needle trembling slightly as fatigue pressed down. His gaze fell to the unconscious man's face once more, studying the hard lines etched by years of rough living, the tattoos that snaked across his skin like shadows of choices long made. There was a story buried there, a past heavy with violence and regret. And though a fragment had surfaced, red vultures, Jack knew the truth lay coiled deeper, beyond reach for now. Emily shifted closer to her father, her voice hushed, almost a whisper swallowed by the storm. "Will he live?" Jack's shoulders rose and fell with a sigh that carried the weight of uncertainty. "If he wants to," he replied softly, his tone carrying the unspoken truth that sometimes the fight for life was as much within as without. He reached for the blanket draped over the back of the sofa and pulled it gently across the man's chest, tucking it around his shoulders with a care that belied the suspicion twisting in his gut. For a long while, the only sounds were the storm's relentless pounding, the crackle of the fire, and the slow, uneven breathing of the biker. Emily leaned her head against Rex, the dog's steady heartbeat grounding her, while Jack sat nearby, elbows braced on his knees, eyes fixed on the shadows dancing against the wall. The name Red Vultures echoed through his mind like a distant drumbeat, but he forced it aside. Tonight was not for answers. Tonight was for survival, for stitches and silence, for a stranger's broken whispers that left more questions than they solved. The fire in the hearth burned low, its embers pulsing weakly as Jack pulled a blanket tighter around the wounded man. The storm still clawed at the windows, rain streaking the glass in endless sheets, while Emily sat curled on the stool, her scarf balled against her chest. Rex lay close by, eyes half-lidded but watchful, ears twitching with every groan of wind outside. Jack's plan was set. At first light, he would get the stranger Ethan, as revealed faintly in his stitched jacket, to the hospital. The danger was too heavy to ignore, but the night, as it turned out, was far from finished. A faint sound broke through the storm, not thunder, not wind, but the crunch of tires against wet gravel, muffled yet deliberate. Jack froze, his soldier's instincts firing awake, his hand drifting toward the rifle propped against the wall. He extinguished the lantern with a swift twist, plunging the room into shadow, the only light now the faint glow of embers. Emily looked up sharply, sensing her father's change, while Rex rose stiffly, his injured leg trembling, yet his stance firm. The cabin, once sanctuary, had turned into a trap, its wooden walls a thin barrier against what approached. The first strike came sudden and brutal. A window pane shattered inward with a thunderous crack, shards spraying across the room as a metal canister clattered to the floor. Smoke hissed upward, acrid and suffocating, filling the air with a choking fog. Emily coughed hard, tears welling in her eyes as Jack yanked her close, pushing her toward the heavy oak table. Figures surged through the broken frame, masked men in soaked jackets, knives glinting under the weak light, pistols raised with ruthless precision. Their boots pounded the floorboards, the storm howling behind them as if it too was complicit in the assault. "They tracked us," Jack muttered under his breath, realization striking sharp. He remembered the deep grooves of tire marks in the mud outside and the glow of his flashlight on the bridge signs. No predator would miss. Now the hunters had come home. Jack raised his rifle and fired once, the sharp crack echoing louder than thunder. A masked intruder spun and collapsed against the wall, his weapon clattering uselessly to the ground. But the others pressed forward, unflinching, their faces hidden, but their intent carved in violence. Rex, though limping, surged into motion with a guttural snarl. His powerful body launched across the rug, teeth clamping down on the forearm of a man who lunged at Jack with a knife. The scream was raw, torn from the intruder's throat as Rex shook with a ferocity that belied his injury, his jaws locked like iron. Blood sprayed across the planks, the knife clattering from the man's grasp as the dog bore him down. Emily screamed, "Rex!" But her cry was not fear. It was raw urgency, her heart tethered to the animal who had protected her since she could walk. Jack pivoted, covering their flank, his rifle barking again. Another masked figure staggered back, clutching a wounded shoulder, but the chaos only thickened. Emily tugged desperately at Ethan's limp arm, her small frame straining as she dragged him behind the table. She pulled a blanket over him clumsily, shielding his bloodied chest from view, whispering through her tears, "Stay alive. Please, don't give up." Ethan's eyelids fluttered, his body shuddering, and though pain swallowed him, he heard her voice like a thread tying him to the world. Out of the haze stepped a figure that stilled even the storm's roar. Tall, broad-shouldered, clad in the dark uniform of law enforcement, his badge gleaming faintly under the fire's glow. The mask was gone, his face revealed Deputy Carl. A man in his late 30s, his hair cropped short, his jaw scarred from an old wound, eyes cold with arrogance. He had been the familiar presence in town, the deputy who shook hands at fairs and tipped his hat to old women on porches. Yet here, In the cabin lit by smoke and violence, his smirk revealed the truth. He was the one shielding the red vultures, the rot inside the badge. Emily's voice cracked as she cried out, "Rex!" The German shepherd, bleeding from a slash along his flank, stumbled yet rose again. His teeth bared, his ears pinned back, he lunged with the last of his strength. He collided with Carl, jaws snapping for his arm, forcing the deputy back against the wall. For a heartbeat, the mask of civility shattered, Carl's eyes wide with rage and fear, his identity exposed in the chaos. Jack's breath caught in his chest, fury burning as betrayal stood plain before him. Ethan, still half-conscious on the floor, saw the scene through blurred vision. The loyal dog risking his last ounce of strength, the child screaming his name, the soldier braced in defiance. Something shifted deep within him, a flame long buried under years of running and hiding. His hand closed weakly around the edge of the table, his knuckles white as he dragged himself upward. "No more," he rasped, his voice breaking, but his will unmistakable. For the first time, he chose not to flee, but to stand alongside those who had risked everything for him. The cabin shook with violence, smoke thick as a shroud, firelight flashing across desperate faces. Jack fired again. Rex refused to release his grip. Emily clung to hope with trembling hands, and Ethan found his strength in the wreckage of his own fear. The storm outside was fierce, but the one within these four walls was fiercer still, a crucible of loyalty and betrayal, of blood and resolve. And in that crucible, truths that had long hidden in shadow began to burn into light, one name, one face, one betrayal at a time. The cabin trembled under the weight of chaos, smoke thick in the rafters, the sharp scent of gunpowder mixing with blood and sweat. Jack's rifle barked in short, disciplined bursts while Rex snarled through clenched teeth, refusing to let go of his prey. Emily crouched low behind the table, clutching Ethan's arm with both hands as if her touch alone could anchor him to life. Deputy Carl loomed in the haze, his smirk cruel even as the loyal dog tore at his sleeve. The storm outside still raged, but inside the walls of the cabin it felt as if the world had narrowed to one final struggle. Then came a sound that shattered the fury-long, piercing sirens cutting through the downpour, rising above thunder with authority no outlaw could ignore. Red and blue strobes flashed across the rain-slicked windows, followed by the heavy grind of tires on wet earth. The masked intruders faltered, hesitation breaking their assault as shouts rolled across the clearing. "Federal agents, drop your weapons." The door burst wide, and dark silhouettes surged in, rifles raised, voices booming in practiced command. The FBI had arrived. Chaos turned to collapse in a heartbeat. Gunmen dropped their weapons or were forced down, steel cuffs clamping shut against mud-stained wrists. Carl fought, his eyes blazing with rage, but agents dragged him to the ground, his protests drowned beneath their orders. In the doorway, broader than the storm behind him, Sheriff Whitaker appeared, his face rigid, his hand hovering near his holster. For years he had been the figure of authority in Redwood Valley, a man people trusted to keep order, yet now his silence betrayed him. An agent's hand shoved him against the wall, his badge ripped away, and the whispers of suspicion became truth. Jack lowered his rifle at last, his chest heaving with exhaustion. The sight of Whitaker being let out in cuffs burned itself into his mind, the betrayal cutting deeper than any bullet could. Emily clung to Rex, her small hands buried in his fur, whispering his name over and over as if it might keep him alive. The German shepherd trembled, blood streaking his leg, yet he lifted his head proudly, eyes fixed on her with a devotion that never wavered. Ethan, pulled upright by two agents, nearly collapsed again, his face pale but his spirit steadier than it had been in years. The cabin was secured within minutes, voices echoing with the weight of victory and exposure. The FBI commander, a tall woman in tactical gear with sharp brown eyes, addressed Jack with a nod of respect. "We've been tracing the red vultures for months." "Your cabin became the breaking point, the evidence we needed." Jack said nothing at first, only looked around at his battered home, at the splintered wood and shattered glass. He had fought wars overseas, but tonight the war had come to his doorstep, and he had not turned away. Ethan sat slumped against the wall, bandages hastily applied by a field medic, his breath ragged but no longer fading. His eyes found Emily, who sat cross-legged on the rug beside Rex, stroking the dog's ears with gentle care. "You saved me," Ethan murmured, his voice cracked but resolute. "No one else ever has." Jack glanced at him, wary yet understanding, and gave a curt nod. For now, Ethan was still a man under suspicion, but the courage he had shown in the final moments could not be ignored. Morning broke slowly, the storm finally giving way to a pale horizon. The fields glistened under a veil of mist, the creek rushing fast but golden now in the first rays of sun. The cabin, scarred and battered, stood silent, its walls bearing the memory of the night. On the hill nearby, Jack stood with Emily at his side and Rex lying at their feet, his body weak but his eyes shining with pride. Ethan leaned on a crutch offered by an agent, his posture unsteady yet upright, his gaze fixed on the dawn as though it carried something he thought he had lost long ago. Ethan turned to Emily, his voice softer now, carrying gratitude that went beyond words. "Because of you," he said, his gray eyes misted with something more than pain. "I believe people can still be good, even when the past is dark." Emily blinked at him, her small face lighting with the fragile smile of a child who had chosen kindness when fear would have been easier. Jack rested a heavy hand on her shoulder, his voice deep, steady, carrying the weight of truth. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the smallest kindness changes an entire life." The agents moved away with their prisoners, vehicles rumbling back toward town, but the Carter family remained on the hill, the first light of morning painting them in hues of gold. For years, Jack had been the veteran who kept to himself, the man too scarred for company, too silent for trust. But now, the town would whisper his name differently. They would call him the quiet hero, the one who fought when no one else could, whose daughter and dog embodied loyalty and compassion in their purest forms. And as the sun rose higher, washing away the storm's shadows, Redwood Valley felt changed. Not because the red vultures were gone, not because the sheriff had fallen, but because kindness and loyalty had triumphed in the heart of one family. Jack looked down at his daughter and the dog at her side, his chest swelling with pride. In their courage, in their compassion, he saw a lesson deeper than any battlefield had taught him. That hope is not found in strength alone, but in the quiet resolve to care for another. In the end, this story is not only about betrayal or violence, but about compassion and the silent sacrifices that change lives. A little girl's kindness, a loyal dog's courage, and a father's resolve became the light that broke through the storm. It reminds us that true strength is not found in power or fear, but in the willingness to protect and to care, even when no one is watching. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what this story made you feel, and do not forget to subscribe to join a community that believes in kindness and humanity. May God bless you and protect everyone who watches today.